Howdy doody everyone, I'm Wambu, and we're here in the courtroom once again. Like I said 4 months ago when I talked about my least favorite cases, I love this franchise to death. Yeah, there are a few cases that don't work for me, but that's not what we're talking about this time. At their worst, these games are frustrating and kinda boring. But at their best, they're brilliant games with deeply written stories, biting conflict, and instantly memorable characters. And that's what we're looking at today. My absolute favorite Ace Attorney cases. Same rules from last time apply. I'm only talking about one case from each of the 5 main games. No spin-offs, and no 2 cases from the same game. Understand? Good. The number 5 entry is ready, Your Honors. Apollo Justice. You sure are a game. Okay, look, my feelings on this case are pretty mixed. I still like it, but I'm tempted to call it my least favorite of the main Ace Attorney games. Basically, Apollo Justice is for me what Justice for All seems to be with everyone else. But even I have to admit, it makes an incredible first impression. As an introduction for a new game with new characters, a new central conflict, and some new game mechanics, Turnabout Trump goes above and beyond with setting an engaging scene for the player. I typically have no standards when it comes to the introduction cases, but if anything, this one shows that I probably should. Seriously, this case wastes no time dropping some seriously heavy bombs on the players. At first, it's presented just as a guy killing another guy over a game of poker. Typical day in the Borscht Bowl Club, I'm guessing. But then you realize that the hobo sitting in the defendant's chair is actually Phoenix Wright, who at this point in time has been revoked of his attorney's badge. That alone is a pretty tough pill to swallow, but of course the surprises aren't done. See, this is one of the few first cases where the killer isn't immediately revealed to the player, and arguably one of the only first cases where the killer isn't completely obvious. As such, feelings of mistrust tends to build from all sides. You catch Phoenix lying on multiple occasions, the waitress Olga turns out to secretly be a swashbuckling pirate, Phoenix's daughter Trucy is clearly hiding stuff, and Payne has a terrifying hairdo. He may not be the killer this time, but one day. Really, the only one Apollo can trust is himself. Well, himself and his mentor Kristoff. That guy is one pretty swell dude. Or he could turn out to be the killer instead. I suppose that's another possibility that I hadn't yet accounted for. Yet even with the startling identity of the killer revealed, there's still quite a few loose ends that don't really get tied up, such as why Phoenix was disbarred or why Kristoff killed a guy he seemingly has no connection to. In many ways, Turnabout Trump feels more like just a piece of a much bigger puzzle. That's definitely a feature and not a flaw for the record, as it really does add a lot of intrigue to the later cases to come. I do have a few nitpicks with the case. I don't think it makes for a very good introduction to Apollo Justice as a character, and Phoenix acts pretty out of character to the point where it's a little jarring. But honestly, I can forgive these minor issues and still love the case regardless. This case started a whole game by letting fans know that pretty much everything they knew about the franchise before was a lie, and I have to respect that, even if my excitement did sort of lose momentum in the later case. Oh hi, Turnabout Serenade. I still hate you. Well, would you look at that. Dual Destinies made number 4 on the list once again. I'll be honest, this is just a total coincidence. It's not that I find Dual Destinies to be average or anything like that. Hell, it's probably the best in the franchise if we're talking technically. And pretty much every case from this game is good. Even the one I singled out for the worst list isn't that bad. And of course, we even managed to avoid third case syndrome. How did we go for so long with each Ace Attorney game, like clockwork, churning out bad third case after bad third case, just for Turnabout Academy to come along and be the astonishingly great case it is? I mean, not to complain or anything, it's just a nice surprise. Onto the case itself, the premise is that Phoenix has been invited to attend a mock trial at Themis Legal Academy, and of course he brings Athena and Apollo with him. Participating in said mock trial is Juniper Woods, a longtime friend of Athena's who was also the defendant in the first case. Also in the trial are her 2 best friends, Hugh O'Connor and Robin Newman, who really puts the man in Newman, am I right? But actually, she's a girl. As the trial is going on, Athena and Phoenix find Constance Court, the professor who played the murder victim in the mock trial, except she has actually been murdered. And in the exact same way the script had predicted, too. Naturally, since Juniper Woods is the only person who knew the contents of the script beforehand, she is made the defendant once again. But then, in a moment of thorough awesomeness, Athena volunteers to defend her, meaning that you get to play as Athena instead of Phoenix or Apollo. And really, I think it's scenes like this that make me like the case, and here's Here's what I mean. On the whole, the case really isn't as intense as other cases in the game, but it's the large focus on character dynamic that I think ultimately makes this turnabout more impactful than the other cases in the game. I find the cast to be extremely memorable. Athena is great as the main character. She's very admirable in her actions, but also kind of fun in how she muddles her way through the trials. Apollo definitely deserves credit too, though, as his dialogue with Athena is also pretty great. Then there's the three friends, Juniper, Hugh, and Robin, all of whom are fun by themselves and yet also remarkably believable as an ensemble of friends. Juniper hides her meek and shy personality behind a much more stern persona. Hugh acts like a high and mighty smartass, but is actually really ashamed of himself and his history as a student. Finally, there's Robin, who managed to keep her frickin' gender a secret. And yet, even with all the murder accusations flying around from all sides and each of their secrets being revealed, these three go completely out of their way to help each other, which complicates the case a crap ton, but is also an awesome and legitimately touching thing to see. The big bad Aristotle Means also deserves particular mention. He's a good villain, but he's also the root cause of some of my issues with the case. Right when I think we're gonna get a subtle villain for once, and bam, now he's a Spartan. No, that's not my issue with him. It's more that after a while, he kinda makes the moral a little ham-fisted. Okay, we get it, game. The end doesn't really justify the means. Please, stop. But really, that's not a super big deal for me, because what it does right, it does very right. I don't know what else to say, really. This case is fantastic. The end. Okay, I know I said I liked all the cases from the first game, but I seriously wasn't expecting to stick this in the top 3. Of all the cases on the list, Turnabout Goodbyes is the one that I'm able to find the most issues with, and yet despite all the criticisms I've heard of it, I still think it's brilliant. Before I really get down to why I like it, here's a quick rundown of the premise. Our opening depicts two guys talking on a boat in the middle of a lake. One starts menacingly talking about his revenge before swiftly pulling a gun on the other. Later, the body of an attorney named Robert Hammond is found, and the man accused of being his killer is none other than Miles Edgeworth. Trying to emphasize the edge, I see, but cut it out, man, you're scaring the children! Phoenix later ends up taking his case, forcing him to go against Manfred von Karma, a malevolent prosecutor who has gone undefeated for 40 years. As the facts start to come out, the case later turns out to be connected to one from 15 years ago called DL6. So it basically becomes Phoenix's job to solve two mysteries against a prosecutor who has never lost a case, while defending a client who has already accepted a guilty verdict. There are dump trucks of towels ready to be thrown in right now. Now, I could talk about all the events that happened throughout the case, but honestly, we'd be stuck here for a while. It gets pretty convoluted, and I'd be lying if I said that it didn't get weirdly sidetracked in parts. And this is where quite a few people, myself included, have a couple scrapes with the case. It's not really paced incredibly well, and it can be pretty schizophrenic in tone. One second, you're desperately trying to defend Edgeworth with everything you've got, and the next second you're cross-examining a parrot. Getting positive again, though, I didn't mind the odd shifts in tone that much. In fact, I kinda liked that a final case like this could be pretty silly in circumstance, even if it was a little jarring in parts. My love for it goes beyond just being silly and fun, though, as there are some incredibly strong aspects of it. For one, I think the choice to make Edgeworth the defendant was brilliant. Up until this point, he has been a ruthless prick who views every defendant as guilty. With him as the defendant, however, we don't just get to see a new side of him, but also a new side of Phoenix. See, even though Edgeworth has been nothing short of a complete ass, Phoenix takes on his case without hesitation. And for the first time, this big disconnect is created between the player and Phoenix. Of course, this is given an explanation later on, which I think is awesome, as it really deepens both Edgeworth and Phoenix as characters. I think the strongest part of this case for me, though, is the constant feeling of being totally screwed over. With a bunch of evidence pointing to Edgeworth being the killer, and Manfred von Karma taking any opportunity he can to shut you down with his demon objections, it really feels as though the case could just end with a guilty verdict at any moment. And yet when Phoenix does finally start to pull it out of the water, it's satisfying and believable while still retaining its tension from before. I also like the ending, even though it's unbelievably cheesy. Overall, it's a great case to end the first game on. Or it would be if Rise from the Ashes wasn't tacked on to the end of the DS version, but you know what I mean. You know, the more I think about it, the more Trials and Tribulations feels like a really good entry into the franchise. Perhaps it's not quite as impactful on the whole as some of the other ones, and there are some low points, but overall it's got a pretty great selection of cases. And as I said in the last list, on one hand it had probably some of the most epic cases in the game, especially that final case. Yep, this one was obvious. I'm glad this is one of those times where I happen to agree with the general consensus, because I'm not sure how alive I would be had I not included this case. In fact, even putting it at number 2 might be underselling it, but trust me when I say that it lost the top spot by only a little bit. It starts with Maya and Pearl planning to take a trip to Hazakura Temple in order to get Maya special spirit medium training. At first, Phoenix decides not to come along until he looks at the magazine and recognizes one of the nuns as Dahlia Hawthorne, his ex-girlfriend who tried to kill him 6 years ago. When they go, he's met with not Dahlia, but Iris, a totally separate person who also seems to recognize Phoenix for some reason. They also meet with Elise Dunim. I have no idea how that's pronounced. She's a children's book author that Pearl happens to be a big fan of. Come nighttime during Maya's training, Phoenix hears a scream and finds the body of Elise stabbed with the Shinchisto sword. With Iris's fingerprints on the sword and one of the other nuns supposedly witnessing the murder, Iris ends up being the defendant. Not only that, but at the same time as the murder, the bridge connecting the parts of the temple is struck by lightning, causing the bridge to burn with Maya still trapped on the other side. And as Phoenix tries to get across to save Maya, he falls into the river, leaving him out of commission for the first chunk of the case and having Edgeworth take the helm. And that's just how it starts. As the details of the case are revealed, the stakes just become higher and higher. The location of the murder changes along with the murder weapon. Elise Donim turns out to be Maya's mother, Misty. Dahlia Hawthorne makes her final appearance along with Pearl's mother, Morgan. Basically, all the major characters become involved in some way to this one mystery. With all the bases to cover, you'd think the case would start to drag on after a while, and in all honesty, it does. But at no point is it too much of a slog. There's no point I can look to in this case and think, that part wasn't very good. No, it just keeps piling on great moment after great moment, while also tying up some of the loose ends left by cases like Turnabout Goodbyes. And it all culminates perfectly into the final showdown with Godo, as you cross-examine Maya and steadily start to see the full truth of the murder. I don't even really like Godo all that much, but even I can't deny that he is amazing in these final moments of the case. Really, Bridge to the Turnabout is just an incredibly tragic and yet uplifting case. Seeing all these characters throughout the games bond together to solve this one penultimate case is really something unbelievable. It's a perfect way to send off the original trilogy of Ace Attorney. And yet... Those of you who are as big on the Phoenix Wright franchise as I am, I know what you're thinking. He still hasn't talked about the second game yet, Justice for All. This sounds really familiar. Yeah, Justice for All is seriously topping both lists. Like the game or not, I think we can all agree that Justice for All is an entry in the franchise like no other. I guess like last time, I'm supposed to do some funny little fake out, right? Point out how obvious it would be for me to stick Farewell My Turnabout as my number 1 in order to make you guys think that I'm picking something else, but then defy your expectations once again by indeed picking Reunion and Turnabout. No, I actually am picking Farewell My Turnabout. I think I've pretty much made this list as predictable as possible, but I can't help it. This case is too good. The story starts at Gatewater Hotel, where Phoenix, Maya, and Pearl are watching a contest of TV superheroes. Later in the day, they learn that the actor playing one of the superheroes has been murdered, and the defendant is his rival, Matt Ungard. Now, this isn't actually the first time we've had a setup like this. In fact, Turnabout Samurai from the first game was incredibly similar, but it gets way more interesting than that. Later, Maya gets kidnapped by an assassin named Shelly the Killer, who promises Phoenix her return so long as he can get a not guilty verdict from Matt Ungard. So it basically becomes a matter of proving Ungard's innocence while also trying to find hints of Maya's whereabouts. So things are a little intense here. Maya might be killed by an assassin, but all you have to do is get an acquittal. No sweat, right? That's what you've been doing throughout the game. Well, unfortunately, it's not that simple. As the case proceeds, more and more evidence comes out pointing to Ungard as the killer. Eventually, Phoenix is able to turn the case around and cast suspicion upon Ungard's manager, Adrian Andrews. But just when things seem like they're going well, you get brutally stabbed in the back by this fucker right here. That's right, Ungard hired the assassin to kill the victim, and was also in on Maya's kidnapping. From this point onward, everything starts to go to shit. From here, Phoenix is left with an impossible choice. He can speak the truth but lose his close friend, or bury it and let Ungard go free. It is by far the most profound conflict I have ever seen Ace Attorney handle. You want to root for Phoenix because he's trying to save his friend, but with his moral compass thrown completely out of whack, he's putting everyone he knows against him, as well as showing himself in the ugliest light possible. A friend of mine put this best. It's like every line Phoenix says is as if he's spitting out poison. You can tell that every time he's forced to give his input, it is killing him inside. And when he does finally manage to work his way around this bad position, it provides the greatest feeling of relief I have ever experienced in a game. Farewell My Turnabout may not be the most important case in the franchise, or the one that ties everything together, but the way it completely upends the typical conflict in such a brilliant way, it really is, for me, the absolute best case Ace Attorney has ever had.